has been an insane couple of months in Canada, as right now in the Great White North, the Emergencies Act inquiry is taking place. The Public Order Emergencies Commission is holding hearings investigating everything to do with the Freedom Truckers Convoy from earlier this year, from interviewing the truckers themselves who stood up against COVID regulations to the Trudeau administration's overwhelming response to it, and basically whether that response was justified. While these hearings have been going on, it is only today, after 6 weeks, that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has actually taken the hot seat himself at the inquiry. And boy, oh boy, have things gotten spicy as a result. We've got Trudeau flip-flopping while under oath, lying under oath, submitting redacted documents that should not have been redacted at all, and even the massive exposure that the American president, Joe Biden, was involved in the trucker shutdown himself. It is a hell of a story to analyze, but before we get into it all, I wanted to give a massive thank you to this channel's sponsor, Noble Gold. Money is broken. Everything's getting more expensive, the government's losing control, and the Fed just seem to be making things worse. Trying to get decent returns on your savings is driving you nuts. Sound familiar? Noble Gold gets it. Completely focused on honesty and education, their team of precious metals experts have helped thousands of worried investors like you to build and preserve wealth through times like these. By giving you direct contact with a single dedicated professional, you get exclusive free access to that help with no hassle or call centers to deal with. Find out why precious metals and IRAs are the answer to inflation and financial contagion. Give the team at Noble Gold a call and join the others who have taken advantage of their offer. They'll guide you through the process and make it easy. And this month, they're gifting a stunning free 3-ounce silver American Virtue coin with every qualified IRA above $20K. You can't go wrong with Noble Gold. Call 877-646-5347 for more, or visit their website, noblegoldinvestments.com. Okay, so let's start this out by going through some important background that you'll need to know. On February 14th this year, the Trudeau government invoked the Emergencies Act for the first time in our nation's history. It's basically like a wartime act. Ministers argued that the invocation was necessary because of the risks that the Freedom Convoy posed to Canada's security, economy, and international reputation. It was these emergency powers that were then used to usher police forces into convoy protesters, arrest leaders of the convoy like Tamara Lich, and freeze people's bank accounts. The investigation, therefore, will determine whether the alleged threat to the security of Canada was actually legitimate and if the government had the right to invoke the Emergencies Act in the way that it did. Now, my favorite part about all of this hearing stuff, is that Trudeau himself has actually been forced to testify in front of real Canadians, actual convoy members, and Tamara Lich herself, who had a front row seat. Probably the most accountability Trudeau will ever have in his life. Although he did get to appoint the judge for the hearings, for the inquiry. I mean, a little sus, but whatever, moving on. We have learned a lot of interesting things so far about the Canadian government's behavior throughout this commission and their seemingly faulty reasoning for invoking the emergency powers themselves. Let's start with what I would consider some of the most shocking admissions so far. So, firstly, something you need to know, the Emergencies Act can only be brought in under circumstances of espionage, sabotage to Canada's interests, foreign-influenced activities, or things like a violent overthrow of the government. However, this Monday, for the first time, we learned through the hearings that despite the government's stated reasons for invoking the act, the acting director of CSIS, Canada's intelligence agency, told the government the protest at no time posed a threat to Canada's security under the definition of that legislation, and that there were no signs of foreign interference. Ironically enough, it appears the only foreign interference discovered had nothing to do with the protesters themselves, as we also learned in the hearings that US President Joe Biden ordered Justin Trudeau to end the Freedom Convoy right before he invoked emergency powers. It has been revealed that Biden pressed on his Canadian counterpart to stop the convoy, with Canadian Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland saying that Washington was very, very worried. The minister emailed staff on February 10th saying that the US government feared all their northeastern car plants will shut down if the convoy was not stopped within 12 hours. Trudeau, according to texts between Clow and Freeland, talked to Biden about money, people, and political media support, with the likes of Fox News' Tucker Carlson influencing the blockades with nightly coverage. The next day, and 3 days after Biden pressed him, Trudeau invoked Canada's Emergencies Act, which had rarely ever been used, to end the protests. The law was used to freeze bank accounts, ban travel to the protests, and compelled tow trucks to remove vehicles from the blockade. Despite having just read that quote, I still cannot believe my own eyes and ears. This is probably the most brazen sellout of Canadian sovereignty in history. Now, perhaps there are some Americans watching who truly do believe that Canada is a 51st state of your nation, but up here, we still do have a perception that we are our own country. And that's certainly what our politicians try to tell us. Given the power and prominence of the United States, there has always been a creeping suspicion and accusations by Canadian nationalists like George Grant, who wrote Lament for a Nation in the 60s, that our government had sold both our nation and culture to the American empire. And I gotta be honest, this revelation seems like a complete and utter vindication for philosophers like Grant, who said that we lost our autonomy a long time ago, that the very freedom of our people to protest is not being dictated by our own prime minister, but instead by the president of a foreign nation. If Trudeau were being honest with himself and the Canadian people, he'd just come straight out and admit it. He's Joe Biden's bitch. And I don't think Biden has anyone like that. But in a nice segue to my second point, we've also now learned that Justin Trudeau seemingly has no respect for speaking under oath. Cian Bexty, who reported at the Commission Live, noted a number of very serious slip-ups from Trudeau during his testimony. Trudeau is caught in a lie, saying CSIS did not meet the requirement to wiretap convoy organizers, yet he met the requirements to invoke the Emergency Measures Act. The requirements are exactly the same. The Prime Minister also argued that there was a significant amount of money coming to the protests from the United States.
And there was also a significant amount of money flowing and support for these occupation activities in Canada that were coming from people in the United States sympathetic to that cause and opposed to both he and I in our public health policies, but also in our general policies.
However, a week before the Emergencies Act was actually invoked by Trudeau, CSIS told government officials that there are no foreign actors identified at this point supporting or financing this convoy. Yes, of course, there were individuals overseas who did donate to the gFHNW. However, it's a bit of a moot point for Trudeau considering Canadians still contributed the vast majority of the funding. Now, this next little slip up from Trudeau made me chuckle a bit because it would almost certainly qualify for the Guinness World Records of quickest political flip-flop in human history.
A willingness to discuss, but you were concerned about setting a precedent where a blockade could equal a change in public policy. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think we have a robust functioning democracy, and public protests are an important part of making sure we're getting messages out there, and Canadians are getting messages out there and highlighting how they feel about various issues. But using protests to demand changes to public policy is something that I think is worrisome.
So public policy can't be changed by protests and shouldn't be. Okay, interesting, Justin. Let's see where this goes.
So thank you, Mr.
Although, sorry, to a certain extent.
No, please go on.
Protests, if you're out protesting that the government is, shutting down a safe injection site or something, you are asking for changes in public policy. But there is a difference between occupations and saying we're not going until this is changed in a way that is massively disruptive and potentially dangerous versus just saying, we're protesting because we want public policy to change, and we're trying to convince people to get enough of them that politicians will listen to enough people saying, okay, I'm going to lose votes if I don't change this. That's the usual way protests can be effective in our democracies.
Wait, so protests can and should change public policy? This is very clear and definitely not confusing at all. I don't know. Justin also seems to be under the impression that it is all thanks to him cracking down on these protests with force that nobody was killed or seriously injured, and not because it was peaceful to begin with. So because Trudeau enacted violence and ran over women with horses, luckily women weren't hit with trucks. I don't know what to tell you guys. Honestly, his testimony only gets more confusing as we go forward. Let's wind back the clock a little bit. Here we have Trudeau speaking to Canadians and labeling people who are opposed to vaccination as racist, misogynists, and all sorts of names.
Oui, on va s'en sortir de cette pandémie par la vaccination. Puis on en connaît tous des gens qui sont en train d'hésiter un petit peu. On va continuer d'essayer de les convaincre. Mais il y a aussi des gens qui sont farouchement opposés à la vaccination.
Qui sont extrémistes.
Qui ne croient pas dans la science, qui sont souvent misogynes, souvent racistes aussi. C'est un petit groupe, mais qui prend de la place.
All right, you guys got that in your brain? You got that video stuck there? All right, here's Trudeau being asked a question at his testimony about that exact quote and completely denying it.
A number of people have testified in this inquiry referencing your widely published comments and calling the unvaccinated racists and misogynists. And we have heard testimony in this inquiry about how some of your officials wanted to label protesters as terrorists. Would you agree with me that one of the most important roles of a prime minister is to unite Canadians and not divide them by engaging in name calling?
I did not call people who were unvaccinated names. I highlighted there is a difference between people who are hesitant to get vaccinated for any range of reasons and people who deliberately spread misinformation that puts at risk the life and health of their fellow Canadians.
I'm sorry, buddy, but we all saw the clip. You said hesitant people were fine, but people who were opposed to vaccination were often racists and misogynists. It's rather interesting, but also unsurprising to see Trudeau afraid to back up his own statements when it's inconvenient for him and he's in the hot seat, right? Now, the third highlight I'm going to bring up about this hearing going on is just how much the lawyers from the Freedom Convoy were hampered by the refusal of the government to release crucial information and continue to be hampered. As one example, a police planning document was provided last minute to the opposition lawyers that was heavily redacted, so much so that the only visible text was the cover page, a signature page, and a one-page description of the situation. Pages 4 through 8 were completely blacked out, just like Justin Trudeau at a college party. Ironically enough, it was actually Trudeau himself who told the lawyers to read the plan, so understandably, they tried to get access to it.
I'd just like to walk the Prime Minister through the pages, not so he could read it because we don't have time, but just to point out that this is a heavily redacted document. So page 1 is the cover page. Page 2 is this signature page. If we could go down, page 3 is a description of the situation and the mission. And then, Mr. Registrar, if you could please scroll down. The rest of this document has been redacted. So that's page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8. So, Prime Minister, you said we should read this plan. We can't. It's within your legal authority to instruct your counsel to remove these redactions. For the sake of the transparency of this commission, sir, would you consider that request?
And of course, given that we live in a free and open society, that's exactly what the government did. Good one, Lauren.
I object to that. On behalf of the Government of Canada, it's Brian Gover once again. This is putting the Prime Minister in an odious position. We had no notice that they would attempt this in cross-examination. These things require careful consideration, do not lend themselves to decisions in the moment, and we maintain our objection.
Commissioner, sorry, sir. This was in our document list that we circulated within time to counsel for the Attorney General. They had noticed that we would be putting this document. And the question is a fair one in response to the Prime Minister's testimony this morning that he said you should read it.
Despite the fact that this document was not only in the list provided by the convoy lawyers and was a fair response to testimony just that very morning, the judge shut it down.
I think it is fair in a sense, but I think what's being raised is it's a little more complicated than the federal government or the Prime Minister releasing these. This is a police operational plan of the OPS involving officers from the OPS and from OPP involving strategy, et cetera, and I would be very surprised if the federal government would order its release without consulting with the various police services. And I think that's the unfairness that's being referred to, and quite frankly, I agree. Now, having said that, he made reference to the plan, and there is an issue about reading it for sure, but I think the context is important.
I have absolutely no idea how this commission is supposed to be able to decide if Trudeau's decision-making process was correct or not, if the process is completely hidden away from the public eye. If our governments can just redact their bad behavior in the interest of federal secrets and even do that in legal commissions investigating them, how are they ever supposed to be held accountable? And you know what? These, of course, sadly, were not the only redacted documents that were refused to see the light of day.
Could you identify on the other side what information was blacked out as irrelevant by your government?
Americans offering tow trucks.
Yeah, and wouldn't you say that discussion of tow trucks was relevant to the discussion we're having here today?
I'm not the one who made these redactions. It's the professional public service that made those redactions, so you'd have to ask them.
Right, well, I think we will be.
In a sane and non-corrupt society, what we would be witnessing here would be the unraveling of the entire Trudeau government. But luckily for them, they've created what in my mind is tantamount to a bloody kangaroo court. All of the evidence that would help expose their nefarious behavior is simply omitted from the proceedings because of security reasons. Even then, the Prime Minister has been caught in various lies, and he'll never be held accountable for it. You know, the whole thing obviously really is a tragedy, as the truths being exposed here may not result in any protections for the Canadian people from authoritarian governments so long as they control their own investigation. But the whole thing still is unfolding, and I have given you guys way too many black pills lately. We're all going to OD on them if we don't have a little bit of hopium in our system. And that is still there, right? The commission is still ongoing. We may yet still see those documents no longer be redacted, with the statements from CSIS that no, the convoy did not pose a threat. No, there wasn't foreign interference. That seems to go in direct contradiction to the government's claims that they had a right to invoke the Emergencies Act. So there is a bit of hope here that there could be good results and actual accountability. I'm not going to bet my life on it because Lord knows, hope is a dangerous thing to have these days. But seriously, keep a keen eye on this. Keep a close eye, share clips from it, make sure your friends and family are seeing what's going on, whether you're in Canada or America. Share analysis like this, because in times like these, the media cannot be allowed to get away with filtering what we see and hear. It's important that people understand how the government are actually behaving behind the scenes. And through this commission, we may get more of a peek into that.